Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take on Victor Davis Hanson's fascinating book, The Second World Wars.
Great book to dive into.
Absolutely. Now that title, Wars Plural,
Mm-hmm.
it probably makes you pause, right? We always just say World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't just for show. It's actually Hanson's whole argument. And that's what we're going to unpack today in this deep dive.
It's a really critical distinction, yeah. Hanson's point is that what we think of as one single event, World War II, it wasn't that simple.
Not monolithic.
Not at all. It was more like a collection of very different wars. Almost paradoxical, really.
Fought in completely different places, too, I imagine.
Oh, totally diverse landscapes. He's
Right.
got the frozen Eastern Front, the North African desert, Pacific jungles, the skies over Britain.
Right.
And each theater had, different key players, different allies, enemies, even different ways of fighting.
But they all came together somehow.
That's the paradox. They did coalesce into this one single, truly global conflict. It's quite remarkable when you look at it that way.
And flowing from that view, Hanson makes this really central kind of provocative point that the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan, despite looking unstoppable early on,
Terrifyingly successful, yeah.
they were actually fundamentally unprepared,
Yeah.
politically, economically, militarily.
Yeah,
Unprepared to win the global war they sort of stumbled into after 1941.
exactly. They were incredibly effective at killing, at destruction.
Horrifyingly so.
But Hanson argues they lacked the ability, the staying power, to actually destroy their enemy's capacity to keep fighting. They could wound, but not, finish the job on a global scale.
I see.
Yeah, and the book weaves this all together brilliantly. It covers the familiar causes, racial ideology, old grudges.
Right, the standard stuff.
But it also really digs into the technological revolution, air power, naval strategy changes, ground combat.
In leadership, too, that must be key.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Hanson looks at both the brilliant and the, frankly, disastrous leadership decisions. And the human cost, of course, is starkly presented.
Unimaginable cost.
Truly. But throughout, he shows how the Allies, who were, let's be honest, caught off guard initially,
Definitely seemed that way.
how they managed to adapt, to learn, and crucially to leverage their, vastly superior industrial and strategic potential to eventually win. It really makes you rethink the whole conflict.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this multiple wars idea. Hanson stresses it didn't just ignite in '39. What were the deeper roots? How did World War I, the supposed war to end all wars, actually set the stage?
Well, Hanson points to this strong sense of continuity, especially for Germany.
Okay.
By 1939, Germany was essentially starting its third major European war in only 70 years. You had the Franco-Prussian War, then World War I.
Right, I haven't thought of it quite like that. 3 in 70 years.
Yeah. And his argument is that conflicts often become serial, they repeat, when an enemy isn't totally defeated, not just militarily, but forced to accept the victor's political terms unequivocally.
And that didn't happen after World War I.
Not really, no. In the West, many democratic leaders saw WWI as this ambiguous tragedy, no clear winners, lots of blame to go around maybe. But the Germans, they learned a different lesson. They actually studied how a clear loser, which they were in 1918, could become a winner next time by exploiting weaknesses. That unresolved ending, it left the door open.
And Hanson connects this directly to Allied appeasement, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He argues it, combined with underestimating the dictators, actually invited war. That's a strong claim.
It is strong, and it's a difficult truth, perhaps. After WWI, the Allies, Britain, France, the U.S., to an extent, they massively scaled back their military.
Disarmament, right.
Exactly. Disarmament, treaties like the Washington Naval Conference limiting ships, the Kellogg-Briand Pact trying to outlaw war.
Seemed like noble goals.
On the surface, yes. But Hanson argues it projected weakness, timidity, a belief that war was obsolete, that international bodies like the League of Nations could handle things.
While the dictators were thinking very differently.
Completely differently. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, the democratic elites often dismiss them, right? As failures, a failed artist, a sort of loudmouth journalist, a seminary dropout.
They underestimated their political skill.
Massively. They thought these guys would just burn out or fail. But they were shrewd, ruthless operators. They looked at things like the League of Nations and saw, weakness, irrelevance.
So they pushed ahead.
They pushed ahead with unilateral aggressive actions, calculating, correctly it turned out, that the West lacked the real will to stop them early on. Appeasement didn't calm them, it encouraged them. A profound misreading of their character.
Okay, so the stage is set. Allied misjudgment. Axis aggression. How did Hitler's first moves in 39 and 40 start escalating things into these Second World Wars, maybe bigger than even he planned?
Well, the invasion of Poland in 39, which he carved up with Stalin.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Exactly. It looked like an easy win, but Hansen calls it Hitler's first huge strategic blunder.
Why a blunder? It seems successful.
Because it guaranteed war with Britain and France, the democracies. Specifically, it meant facing the British Navy and the RAF, forces Germany just wasn't equipped to beat long-term, financially or materially.
Then came the Blitzkrieg in 1940.
Right. The lightning war through France and the Low Countries. Shockingly effective, France collapsed in weeks. But it also involved acts like bombing Rotterdam, targeting civilians, which Hansen sees as a sign of the brutality to come.
So, early wins masking deeper problems.
Precisely. They looked invincible, but the foundation for a long global war wasn't there.
But then things shifted with the Battle of Britain. Hansen marks that as the first real defeat for the Germans. What went wrong for them there?
Yeah, that was absolutely pivotal. The Luftwaffe had seemed dominant over France, but over Britain, between summer 1940 and spring 41, they took unsustainable losses.
Why? Was it just the Spitfire and Hurricane?
Those were great planes, but it was more than that. Hansen emphasizes British organizational skill with radar. They didn't just have it, they used it effectively to vector fighters.
Okay.
They had better airfields, faster turnaround, and critically, British pilots shot down often landed safely on home ground.
And could fight again.
Exactly. German pilots downed over Britain or the Channel. They were lost, prisoners or worse. Plus, Hansen mentions the Germans misjudged British weather and didn't focus enough on destroying RAF airfields early on.
So no air superiority meant no invasion of Britain.
Correct. That defeat basically forced Hitler to look elsewhere, to seek, as Hansen puts it, miracles for the next 5 years. The quick victory plan in the West was dead.
Which leads directly to the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, in June 41, a quest for that miracle. What was the thinking, or the lack of thinking there?
Barbarossa was driven by, well, a dangerous mix of Nazi ideology and just sheer arrogance. Hitler fundamentally ignored or massively downplayed the reality of Soviet strength by 1941.
They weren't weak.
Far from it. They already had the world's largest army, the most tanks, including the T-34 and KV-1, which shocked the Germans, and vast numbers of aircraft.
The German intelligence didn't show that.
German intelligence was flawed, outdated, and Hitler profoundly underestimated Russian resolve, their ability to endure incredible hardship. He was stuck in a WWI mindset, thinking Russia would collapse easily like it did in 1917.
A huge miscalculation.
Monumental. And add to that, he diverted critical resources trains, manpower, fuel away from the military effort for things like the final solution.
The Holocaust wasn't just parallel, it drained resources.
Absolutely. It was a strategic drain, besides being a moral horror. So the WWI model failed completely, setting Germany up for a long, brutal war of attrition they couldn't win.
Okay, this flows right into maybe the central theme of Hansen's book, Allied industrial might versus the Axis. How did this imbalance really shape the war, especially after 1941-1942?
The difference in industrial power was just, well, overwhelming. It became the decisive factor in the long run. Hansen lays out some incredible numbers.
Like what?
The U.S. alone produced almost 3 times more fuel than all other Allied and Axis nations put together.
Wow, 3 times.
And provided something like 90% of Allied aviation fuel. Think about the impact of that.
Unbelievable logistical power.
Exactly. And the Soviet Union, despite horrific early losses, moved its factories and ended up producing more tanks and artillery than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined.
Even Britain held its own.
Amazingly,
Yeah.
Despite being smaller and under attack, British military production nearly matched Germany's.
How did the U.S. manage such output? Hansen calls it hyper-efficiency.
It was a total societal effort. Mobilizing women into factories, Rosie the Rivetals, right, increasing work hours dramatically, and pioneering mass production techniques like for Liberty ships and aircraft on an unprecedented scale.
So they could just outlast and outproduce.
Pretty much. It meant the Allies could fight and sustain massive campaigns on 2 global fronts, simultaneously, Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The Axis couldn't hope to match that. They could replace losses, keep pouring equipment in. Given time, Allied victory became almost mathematically inevitable.
So how did this industrial power translate to the battlefield? Let's talk air power. Hansen stresses its transformation, especially strategic bombing.
Yeah.
What were the key shifts there?
Air power really came of age in WWII. It went from mostly tactical support in WWI to a potentially war-winning strategic weapon, or at least that was the promise, echoing thinkers like Duhay.
Bombing cities to break morale in production.
That was a major part of it, yeah. The British favored nighttime area bombing, hitting whole cities like Cologne, Hamburg, trying to dehouse workers and disrupt everything. Huge civilian costs.
And the Americans.
The U.S. 8th Air Force initially tried daylight precision bombing, aiming for specific factories like ball bearings in Schweinfurt or aircraft plants. Very dangerous, very costly in terms of bomber losses early on, until long-range fighters arrived.
Did it work?
The effectiveness is still debated, but the sheer scale eventually ground down German industry and infrastructure. And against Japan, the B-29 Superfortress. Hansen calls it the deadliest weapon of the war before the A-bomb.
Leading to the firebombing raids.
Exactly. Horrific raids that wiped out vast areas of Japanese cities, culminating, of course, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It showed a new, terrifying reach for warfare.
And on the seas. Hansen argues the battleship era ended, replaced by the aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Why was that shift so vital, and how did the U.S. come to dominate?
That shift was absolutely fundamental. Battleships like the Yamato or Byzantine were these awesome symbols, the stuff of pre-war romance, as Hansen puts it.
Big guns, heavy armor.
Right, but also slow, hugely expensive, burned tons of oil, and crucially very vulnerable to aircraft.
Whereas carriers
Became the new capital ships, cheaper, faster, and their planes gave the fleet incredible reach, doubling its striking distance instantly. Plus, their own fighter patrols offered better defense.
And the U.S. built a lot of them.
An incredible number. Over 150 carriers of various types during the war. Japan started with excellent naval aviation, maybe the best pilots initially.
But couldn't replace losses.
Exactly. Their pilot training and industrial base couldn't keep up. The U.S., meanwhile, churned out carriers and pilots. This carrier-based air power, especially in the vast Pacific, was absolutely key to defeating Japan. A mobile air base, projecting power hundreds of miles.
It wasn't just the big hardware, though. Infantry weapons, artillery, they changed too. How did that affect the ground war, particularly that brutal Eastern Front?
Oh, big changes on the ground, too. The standard infantry rifle saw a major upgrade for the Americans with the M1 Garand.
The semi-automatic.
Right. Much faster rate of fire than the bolt-action rifles most other armies use, including the Germans initially. That gave U.S. squads a real firepower edge.
And the Germans had the MG-42.
Yeah, the Buzzsaw. An incredible machine gun, firing 1,200 rounds a minute. Changed squad tactics completely, increased firepower dramatically on both sides.
But Hansen still calls artillery the great killer.
He does. Responsible for maybe half or more of all combat deaths. And here again, Allied industrial power was just crushing. A 10-to-1 advantage in artillery production over the Axis.
10-to-1.
Yeah. So even if German tanks like the Panther or Tiger, with their excellent 88mm guns, were individually superior sometimes.
Numbers mattered more.
Numbers plus overwhelming Allied artillery support plus growing Allied air superiority that could attack tanks and supply lines. It all added up, especially on the Eastern Front. That attritional warfare really favored the side that could just pour in more shells, more tanks, more men.
As the war dragged on into 44-45, the fighting just got more intense, didn't it? And the human cost soared. How did the nature of combat change in those final years?
It became incredibly brutal, especially on the Eastern Front, the real meat grinder, as Hansen calls it. We're talking over 15 million soldiers, Russian and German, killed there.
Just soldiers?
Mostly soldiers in that figure, yeah. And siege warfare was particularly horrific. Leningrad, over 870 days under siege. Over 1 million civilians died, mostly from starvation and disease.
And Stalingrad?
Stalingrad was maybe even worse in terms of concentrated killing, house-to-house fighting, unimaginable destruction. Estimates are 1.5 to 2 million dead soldiers and civilians in that one battle. Just catastrophic.
And Hansen really connects the Holocaust directly to this Eastern War, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Not as something separate, but intertwined with the geography.
He does, very explicitly. The invasion of Eastern Europe and Western Russia, where most European Jews lived, that's what enabled the Nazis to carry out the final solution on an industrial scale.
It gave them access and control.
Exactly. And he makes the chilling point that from a purely cold military perspective, it was a massive drain on German resources. Trains, guards, supplies, all diverted from the war effort to facilitate genocide. It shows how central that horrific goal was to the Nazi project, even at the expense of military aims.
Which brings us to that stunning paradox Hansen highlights. The victors suffered far more casualties than the losers. How do we even make sense of that?
It's a really sobering statistic. Over 60 million dead worldwide, a number that's hard to comprehend. But the victors, chiefly the Soviet Union and China, lost maybe 5 to 7 times more people than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined.
Mostly Soviet and Chinese deaths.
Yeah, around 40 million deaths between those two nations alone, civilian and military. It reflects, well, several things. The incredible brutality of the Axis occupation policies and warfare.
Massacres, extermination.
Right, but
Yeah.
also the Soviets' own scorched earth tactics, and just the sheer scale and ferocity of the fighting on the Eastern Front and in China. Victory came at an almost unthinkable human price for them. It reshaped those societies entirely.
So despite that terrible cost, the Allies did achieve victory. What were the concrete results, and what were some of those surprising paradoxes that Hansen sees emerging in the post-war world?
Well, they definitely achieved their main war aims, right? Liberating occupied countries, destroying Nazism, fascism, Japanese militarism, holding war crimes trials.
The core objectives were met.
Yes. But the paradoxes are fascinating. The Soviet Union, as we just discussed, suffered the most horrific losses, land devastated, yet emerged as arguably the biggest geopolitical winner.
Gaining territory and influence.
Huge influence, reached its peak of power, controlled Eastern Europe, setting the stage for the Cold War. A massive paradox.
And the U.S.?
The U.S. went from staunch isolationism before the war to becoming this global superpower, the world's policeman, with commitments everywhere, a total transformation.
And the losers. Germany and Japan.
Maybe the most striking paradox. Utterly defeated, occupied, disarmed. They channeled all that national energy away from militarism and into economics.
Becoming economic powerhouses.
Exactly. Stable democracies, key allies, economic giants. Who would have predicted that in 1945? It really shows how history can take unexpected turns.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Hansen's The Second World Wars, thinking about it as multiple conflicts, understanding the industrial might, the paradoxes, what's the main thing you think we should take away today?
I think Hansen's work really underscores that while technology and industrial power are, hugely important,
Absolutely.
it's also about resilience. It's about adaptation. It's about the moral dimension or the lack of it. Those factors, the will, the strategy, the ability to learn and leverage resources, that's what ultimately shapes the outcome, the fate of nations. It's more than just tanks and planes.
Which definitely leaves us with something to think about. In our own time, with complex conflicts and so much information flying around, how do we make sure we see the different facets? How do we avoid those simple narratives, especially when looking at new threats?
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Well, we hope this deep dive into Victor Davis Hanson's The Second World Wars has maybe give you some surprising insights, a clearer view, and maybe a fresh perspective on this incredibly pivotal period. Thank you for joining us.